The morning mist clung to the Yellowstone River like a ghostly shroud as Park Ranger Sarah Chen made her way through the dense lodgepole pine forest. It was August 15th, 1987, and what should have been a routine patrol had turned into something far more urgent. Two hikers, Michael Garrett, 28, and his girlfriend Lisa Rodriguez, 26, had failed to return from their planned 3-day backpacking trip into the Thorofare region, one of the most remote areas in the lower 48 states. Sarah paused near Pelican Creek, her radio crackling with static as she tried to reach base camp. The couple from Denver had been reported missing by Lisa's sister after they failed to show up for dinner at the Old Faithful Inn, where they'd planned to celebrate their engagement. Their rented Toyota Corolla sat abandoned in the fishing bridge parking area, covered in morning dew and surrounded by the anxious energy of a search operation already 12 hours old. If you're enjoying this story, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from our viewers around the world. Now let's continue with this haunting mystery that would remain unsolved for nearly 15 years. The Thorofare region stretched endlessly before the search teams, a wilderness so vast and unforgiving that it had swallowed experienced outdoorsmen before. Chief Ranger Tom Bradley coordinated the operation from a makeshift command post near the Yellowstone lake shore, his weathered face creased with concern. Michael and Lisa weren't novices. They'd registered with the backcountry office, filed a proper itinerary, and carried appropriate gear. Yet somewhere in those 300 square miles of alpine meadows, dense forests, and treacherous river crossings, they had simply vanished. The couple's planned route took them along the Continental Divide Trail toward the remote Thorofare Ranger Station, then south toward the Yellowstone River's headwaters. It was ambitious terrain, requiring river fords and navigation through areas where trails often disappeared into game paths carved by elk and bison. Sarah had hiked these mountains for 7 years, and she knew how quickly weather could turn, how easy it was to become disoriented when clouds rolled in and landmarks vanished. On the second day of searching, rescue teams found their first clue, a torn piece of Lisa's distinctive red bandana caught on a whitebark pine branch near Bridger Lake. The fabric was fresh, not weathered by weeks of mountain storms. Search dogs picked up a scent trail leading southeast, deeper into the wilderness toward areas where few hikers ventured. Helicopter crews scanned the rugged terrain below, their rotors echoing off canyon walls as they searched for any sign of the missing couple. Michael's father, Robert Garrett, arrived from Denver on the third day, his face etched with the particular anguish of a parent watching his child disappear into the unknown. A retired engineer with the Colorado Department of Transportation, Robert understood wilderness risks, but he also understood his son's capabilities. Michael had been hiking since he was 10 years old, had completed portions of the Continental Divide Trail, and carried a compass, maps, and emergency supplies. This wasn't a case of inexperienced tourists wandering off marked paths. Lisa's family painted a similar picture of competence and preparation. Her sister Maria described Lisa as meticulous, someone who researched every trail, checked weather forecasts obsessively, and never took unnecessary risks. She was a nurse at Denver General Hospital, trained to remain calm under pressure and make rational decisions in crisis situations. The idea that both experienced hikers would simply make a fatal error seemed increasingly unlikely as the search stretched into its first week. Weather complicated the operation as afternoon thunderstorms rolled across the high country, bringing lightning, hail, and flash flood warnings. Search teams were forced to retreat to lower elevations as conditions deteriorated, losing precious daylight hours. The Yellowstone River ran high and muddy from snowmelt and rain, making water crossings treacherous. Sarah found herself wondering if the couple had attempted a ford at the wrong time, been swept downstream, their bodies carried miles from any search area. By August 25th, the official search was scaled back to a recovery operation. Families struggled with the cruel mathematics of wilderness rescue. After 10 days, survival became increasingly unlikely, especially if injury or exposure was involved. The Park Service continued aerial searches and maintained trail watches at key locations, but the massive ground operation was reduced to a skeleton crew. Robert Garrett and Maria Rodriguez refused to leave, establishing a vigil at the Fishing Bridge parking area, where their loved one's car remained like a monument to the inexplicable. The investigation expanded beyond simple search and rescue as rangers began examining other possibilities. Had the couple encountered dangerous wildlife? Grizzly bears were common in the Thorofare region, and the 1987 season had seen increased bear activity around campsites. Yet no signs of bear encounter were discovered, no torn packs, no scattered gear, no evidence of the violent disturbance that typically marked such incidents. Mountain lions remained possible, but attacks on humans were extremely rare, and lions typically targeted solo hikers rather than pairs. Ranger Bradley interviewed other backpackers who'd been in the area during the crucial time frame. A group from Montana reported seeing two figures matching Michael and Lisa's description near the Thorofare ranger station on August 13th, but the sighting was distant and uncertain. A solo hiker claimed to have heard voices calling for help on the evening of August 14th, but couldn't pinpoint the location and hadn't investigated further. These fragmentary accounts created a rough timeline but offered no concrete leads. As September arrived and autumn began painting the high country in brilliant gold and crimson, the Garrett and Rodriguez families faced an impossible choice: continue their vigil in an increasingly hostile environment, or return home to grieve an absence without closure. The Park Service promised to maintain awareness, to check remote areas during routine patrols, and to investigate any new evidence that might surface. But Yellowstone's wilderness had claimed Michael and Lisa as completely as if they had never existed, leaving behind only questions and the haunting silence of unanswered prayers. The case file grew thin over the following months. Occasional tips led to renewed searches: a hunter reporting suspicious items near Shoshone Lake, a fishing guide claiming to have seen old camping gear in a remote drainage, but each lead dissolved into disappointment. Winter arrived early in 1987, blanketing the Thorofare region under 10 feet of snow, and effectively ending any possibility of ground searches until the following spring. Michael Garrett and Lisa Rodriguez had become another entry in the park's grim ledger of unsolved disappearances, their fate sealed somewhere in the vast wilderness they had loved enough to risk everything exploring. The years that followed brought periodic renewals of hope and crushing disappointment. Each spring thaw revealed new artifacts: a rusty tent stake here, a faded bootprint there, that briefly energized search efforts before proving unrelated to the missing couple. Robert Garrett aged visibly during these annual pilgrimages to Yellowstone, his engineer's mind unable to accept a problem without solution. He studied topographical maps with the intensity of a military strategist, plotted grid searches through areas previously unexplored, and maintained detailed correspondence with park officials who grew increasingly reluctant to commit resources to what seemed an unsolvable mystery. Maria Rodriguez channeled her grief differently, establishing a foundation to improve search and rescue capabilities in national parks. She lobbied for better communication systems, more sophisticated tracking equipment, and enhanced training for backcountry rangers. Her efforts contributed to improved safety protocols that would save other families from similar anguish, but couldn't fill the void left by her sister's absence. Each year, on August 13th, the last confirmed date Michael and Lisa were seen alive, Maria returned to Yellowstone to leave flowers at the trailhead where their journey had begun. By 1995, the case had effectively gone cold. New rangers arrived who knew the story only as departmental legend, while veterans like Sarah Chen transferred to other parks or retired entirely. The missing hikers became part of Yellowstone's dark folklore, mentioned alongside other unsolved mysteries in guidebooks and campfire stories. Their Toyota Corolla had long since been returned to the rental company, their apartment in Denver cleaned out, and belongings distributed among family members who struggled to maintain hope while building new lives around a permanent absence. The park itself seemed to conspire against resolution. Wildfires in 1988 burned vast swaths of the Thorofare region, potentially destroying any remaining evidence. Floods in subsequent years carved new channels through valleys, altered landmarks, and buried or exposed terrain in unpredictable ways. The landscape that had witnessed Michael and Lisa's disappearance was itself disappearing, transformed by natural forces that cared nothing for human mysteries or the families desperate to solve them. Yet somewhere in that transformed wilderness, two lives had intersected with forces beyond their control, leaving behind a puzzle that would challenge assumptions about survival, human nature, and the true boundaries between the known and unknowable. The mountains kept their secrets well, but they didn't keep them forever. 15 years after Michael Garrett and Lisa Rodriguez vanished into the Yellowstone backcountry, their story would finally find a voice, hidden in the most unlikely of places and discovered by someone who had no connection to their tragedy, except the random chance that draws ordinary people into extraordinary circumstances. The truth, when it finally emerged, would prove more complex and heartbreaking than anyone had imagined. It would reveal not just what happened to two young people in love with the wilderness, but something fundamental about human resilience, the bonds that sustain us in our darkest moments, and the prices we sometimes pay for the choices that define us. In the end, Michael and Lisa's disappearance wasn't just a mystery to be solved. It was a testament to the enduring power of hope, even in the face of impossible circumstances. Kevin Morrison had never intended to become part of someone else's story. A software engineer from Seattle taking his first solo camping trip in 15 years, he'd chosen Yellowstone's remote southeastern section specifically to escape the crowds that swarmed the park's more famous attractions. It was July 2002, and Kevin needed solitude to process his recent divorce and figure out what came next for a 43-year-old man starting over. The Thorofare region promised the kind of isolation that might help him think clearly for the first time in months. He'd been hiking for 3 days when he discovered the cave. It was barely visible from the trail, a dark slot in the granite face of an unnamed peak, hidden behind a screen of mountain ash and wild roses. Kevin might have missed it entirely, except that his water filter had clogged, and he'd left the trail to access a small creek that tumbled down from the heights above. The cave entrance was narrow, perhaps 3 feet wide, but it opened into a larger chamber that provided welcome relief from an afternoon thunderstorm that had caught him exposed on the ridge. As Kevin waited for the storm to pass, he explored the cave with his flashlight. It extended back perhaps 30 feet, ending in a jumble of fallen rocks that blocked any deeper penetration. The floor was sandy, scattered with the bones of small animals and the remnants of old campfires, evidence that others had used this shelter over the years. It was while examining these fire rings that Kevin's light caught something that made his heart stop: the corner of a notebook, partially buried under a pile of stones near the back wall. The journal was wrapped in a plastic bag, carefully protected from moisture and hidden with deliberate intention. Kevin's hands trembled as he opened it, immediately recognizing that he was looking at something profoundly private and important. The first entry was dated August 13th, 1987. Day 1 made it to Thorofare Station around 3 p.m. Mike's ankle is bothering him from that twisted step this morning, but he's trying not to show it. The country up here is incredible, like nothing we've ever seen. Plan to push toward Yellowstone Lake tomorrow if the ankle improves. The handwriting was feminine, careful, accompanied by small sketches of wildflowers and mountain peaks. As Kevin read further, he realized he was holding the daily record of Michael Garrett and Lisa Rodriguez, the hikers who had vanished 15 years earlier. His knowledge of their case was limited, a vague memory of newspaper headlines and Park Service bulletins, but he understood immediately that this journal represented something extraordinary, a direct window into the final days of two people who had become legends in their absence. Lisa's entries revealed a trip that had started well but quickly developed complications. Michael's ankle injury was more serious than initially believed, forcing frequent rest stops and slower progress than planned. Weather complicated their situation, as afternoon storms arrived earlier and more intensely than forecasted, turning trails into muddy obstacle courses and making river crossings dangerous. By August 15th, their third day, they were significantly behind schedule and dealing with equipment problems, a torn tent and a stove that had begun malfunctioning. The journal entries grew increasingly concerned as days passed beyond their planned return. Day 5, August 17th, Lisa wrote. We're officially overdue now. Mike's ankle is definitely fractured. He can barely put weight on it. Tried to signal for help yesterday with the mirror, but no aircraft visible. The creek crossing near Bridger Lake is running too high and fast to risk with his injury. We're going to have to find another route or wait for the water to drop. Kevin found himself completely absorbed in the narrative, feeling like an unwelcome voyeur into someone's most private moments, while simultaneously recognizing the historical importance of what he'd discovered. Lisa's writing revealed not just the practical challenges they faced, but the emotional dynamics of two people under extreme stress. Her love for Michael was evident in every entry, but so was her growing fear as their situation deteriorated and options dwindled. Day 7, August 19th, read one particularly poignant entry. Mike tried to convince me to leave him and go for help alone. I told him absolutely not. We go together or we don't go at all. Found this cave yesterday and decided to make it our base camp while his ankle heals. There's water nearby, decent shelter, and we can see a long way down the valley. If search teams come this way, we should be able to signal them. Mike carved our initials in the back wall, said it was so people would know we were here if anything happens to us. The journal revealed survival strategies that demonstrated both intelligence and desperation. They rationed food carefully, improvised repairs to damaged equipment, and established routines to maintain morale and physical health. Lisa documented their attempts to signal aircraft, the construction of rock cairns that might attract attention, and increasingly creative efforts to deal with Michael's worsening condition. Her medical training proved invaluable as she fashioned splints, managed pain with limited supplies, and monitored his ankle for signs of infection. But it was the emotional content that truly captured Kevin's attention. Between practical observations about weather and rations, Lisa wrote about conversations with Michael that revealed the depth of their relationship and their shared dreams for the future. They talked about the house they planned to buy in Boulder, the children they wanted to have, the travels they would undertake once they escaped this predicament. The journal became their link to a future that grew more distant with each passing day. Day 12, August 24th, Lisa wrote in increasingly shaky handwriting. Mike's fever broke this morning, but he's very weak. The infection in his ankle is spreading despite everything I've tried. We're down to our last few meals, and I haven't seen any aircraft in 3 days. Starting to think the search might be winding down. Mike made me promise to write down what happened if he doesn't make it. He says it's important that our families know we didn't give up, that we fought to get home to them. Kevin realized he was crying as he read these later entries. The journal transformed Michael and Lisa from mysterious disappearances into real people facing impossible circumstances with courage and dignity. Lisa's medical expertise told her exactly what Michael's condition meant, yet she continued documenting their situation with scientific precision while pouring her heart onto the pages. Her love for Michael became the journal's central theme, stronger than fear, more persistent than despair. The final entries were the most difficult to read. Michael's condition deteriorated rapidly as infection spread through his system, and their food supplies dwindled to nothing. Lisa wrote about attempting to hunt small game with improvised weapons, about foraging for edible plants, about the gradual realization that rescue was no longer coming. Her handwriting grew weaker, more erratic, but her determination to document their story never wavered. Day 18, August 30th, read one of the last clear entries. Mike passed away this morning just after sunrise. I held his hand and told him about all the places we would have gone together, all the things we would have done. He made me promise to keep writing, to make sure people know what really happened to us. I buried him in the meadow below the cave, marked the spot with stones arranged in a cross. The journal and his ring are all I have left of us now. Kevin sat in stunned silence as he processed what he'd read. This wasn't just the solution to a 15-year-old mystery. It was an intimate portrait of love, tested by circumstances beyond anyone's control. Lisa had survived Michael by several days, continuing to write even as her own strength failed, determined to ensure their story would eventually be found and understood. Her final entries were barely legible, but they completed a narrative of remarkable courage and devotion. The last entry was dated September 3rd, 1987. Getting very weak now. Haven't eaten in 4 days. Keep thinking about Mike's smile, the way he looked at mountains like he was seeing them for the first time. If someone finds this, please tell our families we love them. Tell them we were happy together, even at the end. The ring is under the loose rock by the back wall. Please make sure it gets to Mike's father. Kevin carefully closed the journal, his hands shaking with emotion and the weight of responsibility. He had stumbled upon something sacred, the final testament of two people who had faced death with remarkable grace. But he also held the key to answering questions that had tormented families for 15 years, the power to finally bring closure to one of Yellowstone's most enduring mysteries. As the storm outside began to clear, Kevin knew his solitary camping trip had become something far more significant than personal reflection. The hike back to civilization felt like the longest of Kevin's life. Every step carried him further from the cave where Michael and Lisa had spent their final days together, but closer to the moment when their story would finally be heard. The journal, carefully wrapped and protected in his pack, seemed to pulse with the weight of its revelations. Kevin found himself thinking not just about the couple who had died in these mountains, but about their families, parents and siblings who had spent 15 years wondering, hoping, gradually accepting that they might never know the truth. He reached the fishing bridge area at sunset on July 15, 2002, exactly 15 years and 1 month after Michael and Lisa had begun their fateful journey. The parking lot was busy with summer tourists loading gear and planning their own adventures into Yellowstone's backcountry. Kevin watched them with new understanding of how quickly wilderness could transform from playground to peril, how thin the line between adventure and tragedy really was. The journal in his backpack contained lessons written in heartbreak, wisdom purchased at the ultimate price. The Park Service response was swift and professional. Within hours of Kevin's report, Ranger Jennifer Walsh was coordinating a recovery mission to the cave site. She was part of a new generation of park employees, hired long after the original search had ended, but she understood the significance of Kevin's discovery immediately. The Garrett Rodriguez case remained one of the park's most prominent unsolved mysteries, referenced in training materials and mentioned whenever missing persons protocols were reviewed. The recovery team that hiked into the Thorofare region the following morning included specialists in wilderness forensics, photography, and archaeological preservation. They treated the cave site with the reverence appropriate to a tomb, carefully documenting the location where Michael and Lisa had spent their final weeks together. The small chamber had remained largely undisturbed since 1987, protected by its remote location and hidden entrance. Even the rock cairns Lisa had built to mark Michael's grave remained intact, weathered but recognizable 15 years later. Michael's remains were found exactly where Lisa had described, in a small meadow below the cave, covered by stones arranged in the shape of a cross. Time and weather had reduced his body to bones and fragments of clothing, but his identity was confirmed through dental records that his father had maintained in desperate hope of eventual discovery. Lisa's body was found inside the cave, curled peacefully near the back wall where she had chosen to spend her final days close to their shared memories and the journal that preserved their love story. The engagement ring mentioned in Lisa's final entry was recovered from beneath a loose rock, exactly as she had described. It was a simple gold band with a small diamond, modest by contemporary standards, but precious beyond measure to the families who had wondered for 15 years whether their children had suffered, whether they had died alone, whether they had maintained hope until the end. The journal answered these questions with devastating clarity and unexpected comfort. Robert Garrett received the news at his home in Denver, where he had maintained a study filled with maps and search records from his annual trips to Yellowstone. At 74, he had never stopped believing his son would be found, never stopped planning new areas to explore when spring returned to the mountains. The confirmation that Michael had died in 1987 brought grief, but also relief. The terrible not knowing that had dominated his life for 15 years was finally over. Learning that his son had faced death with courage, supported by the woman he loved, provided a kind of peace Robert had thought impossible. Maria Rodriguez, now 41, and married with children of her own, was working at the Search and Rescue Foundation she had established in Lisa's memory when she received the call. The foundation had grown into a significant organization, providing training and equipment that had saved dozens of lives in wilderness emergencies across the western United States. Knowing that Lisa's death had contributed to preventing other tragedies gave Maria comfort, but nothing could replace the sister she had lost or fill the void left by 15 years of uncertainty. The journal became the centerpiece of a small memorial service held at the Thorofare Ranger Station in September 2002. Family members, park employees, and members of the search teams who had looked for Michael and Lisa gathered to honor their memory and celebrate the resolution of a mystery that had haunted Yellowstone for 15 years. Kevin Morrison was invited as the guest of honor, though he struggled with the attention focused on what he considered a chance discovery that any hiker might have made. Reading selected passages from Lisa's journal aloud proved almost unbearably moving for everyone present. Her words brought Michael and Lisa back to life in ways that statistics and search reports never could, revealing not just what had happened to them, but who they were as people. The love story documented in those pages transformed them from cautionary tale into inspiration, an example of how human bonds can remain strong even in the face of impossible circumstances. The cave itself was designated as an unofficial memorial site, though park officials were careful not to publicize its exact location. They had no desire to create a morbid tourist attraction or encourage dangerous pilgrimages to remote wilderness areas. The site remained accessible to family members and researchers, but its coordinates were not included in public records. Michael and Lisa had found peace in that hidden chamber, Park officials were determined to preserve that tranquility. Forensic analysis of the remains and artifacts confirmed the journal's accuracy in remarkable detail. The progression of Michael's ankle injury, the evidence of Lisa's medical interventions, the timeline of their final weeks, everything matched her careful documentation. Medical experts praised her field treatment of Michael's fracture and subsequent infection, noting that she had employed sophisticated techniques with minimal resources. Her nursing background had extended his life significantly beyond what might have been expected in such circumstances. The journal also revealed details about their relationship that provided comfort to grieving families. Michael and Lisa had used their final weeks together to share memories, dreams, and the kind of deep conversations that many couples never have time for in normal life. They had faced death together with remarkable grace, supporting each other through fear and pain, while maintaining hope until the end. Their love story had been compressed into 18 days of extreme circumstances, but those days contained a lifetime's worth of devotion. Weather records from 1987 confirmed the challenging conditions Lisa had described, unusually early and severe storms that made travel dangerous and hampered search efforts. River gauges showed elevated water levels that would have made the crossings they attempted extremely hazardous, especially for someone with Michael's mobility limitations. Their decision to shelter in the cave had been tactically sound. They simply lacked the resources to wait out conditions that lasted longer than anyone could have predicted. The discovery also vindicated search efforts that had been criticized as inadequate at the time. The cave's location was in an area that had been searched, but its entrance was so well concealed that searchers had passed within yards without detecting it. Ground teams had found Lisa's bandana and followed scent trails that led in the right direction, but the specific terrain features that concealed the cave made discovery nearly impossible without exact knowledge of its location. The search had been as thorough as terrain and weather permitted. Kevin Morrison found himself profoundly changed by his accidental role in bringing closure to the Garrett Rodriguez mystery. The experience convinced him that wilderness adventure carried responsibilities beyond personal safety, that those who ventured into remote places became part of a larger community bound together by shared risks and mutual obligation. He began volunteering with search and rescue organizations, contributing technical skills to improve communication and coordination systems used in wilderness emergencies. The story of Michael Garrett and Lisa Rodriguez became a case study in wilderness survival, featured in training programs for outdoor professionals and emergency responders. Their experience illustrated both the possibilities and limitations of backcountry first aid, the importance of communication plans and emergency protocols, and the psychological factors that influence survival in extreme situations. Lisa's journal provided insights into decision-making under stress that proved valuable for training purposes while honoring the memory of two people who had faced impossible choices with remarkable courage. But beyond its practical applications, the journal served as a reminder of something more fundamental: the power of love to endure beyond death, beyond time, beyond the vast indifference of wilderness that cares nothing for human hopes and fears. Michael and Lisa had found each other in life, supported each other in extremity, and left behind a record of devotion that transformed their tragedy into something approaching triumph. They had been lost for 15 years, but they had never really been gone. Their love story, preserved in Lisa's careful handwriting, would endure as long as people believed in the power of two hearts beating as one, even when those hearts had long since fallen silent. In the end, Kevin Morrison's discovery in that hidden cave did more than solve a mystery. It revealed a truth about human nature that transcends the circumstances of any individual tragedy. Michael Garrett and Lisa Rodriguez had vanished into Yellowstone's wilderness in 1987. but they emerged 15 years later as symbols of something indestructible in the human spirit, something that survives even when the body fails and hope seems lost. Their journal became their monument, their final gift to a world that had wondered for too long what became of two young people who loved each other enough to face the unknown together, and who found in that love the strength to leave behind a legacy more powerful than mere survival.